This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. What makes Jews lose their sense of place, and what can give it back to them? For Boston College political science professor Alan Wolfe, the answer to where Jews should be comfortable is straightforward: in the diaspora, where they've primarily been for the past 2,000 years. We discuss his book, At Home in Exile, Why Diaspora is Good for the Jews. And then, for Shira Dicker, finding comfort at an American college campus has been a bit of a challenge. She shares some of her experiences in a novella, The Jerusalem Lover. But first, here's my interview with Alan Wolfe about why diaspora is good for the Jews. So diaspora is good for the Jews. Is it better for the Jews?
Well, before 1948, that really wasn't a question, right? It was only diaspora. So Israel complicates the subject, indeed. I would answer your question by saying this. If someone could have asked me what would be the ideal demographic distribution of the Jewish people in the year 2014, I would have said roughly half in Israel and half outside, and that's exactly what we have.
Let's then go to the premise of the question, which is to say the idea that diaspora is good for the Jews assumes there's someone out there saying diaspora is not good for the Jews. But here we are, and as you said, you've got more than half the Jewish population, 67 years after the founding of the State of Israel. Obviously, the Jewish community has voted, and it has voted that it likes the diaspora in a significant, to a significant degree.
Yeah, but as I'm sure you know, I mean, that would have been a vote that would have really driven many of the early Zionists to despair. You know, what people call the negation of the diaspora, which was such a key idea for Bialik and for all these fascinating Zionists. I found myself endlessly interested in the early origins of Zionism. So there was this tendency to use language to describe diaspora Jews that was worse than language that anti-Semites would use. They were rats singing, or they were scum. I mean, the words are just unbelievable. A lot of that is gone, but it hasn't all gone. You know, I wouldn't associate Ben-Gurion with that kind of thinking, but when he was Israel's leader, he would periodically make speeches. You know, we want your children kind of speeches, and these days we have Hillel Halkin and A.B. Yeshua saying very much the same kind of thing. So it's not an idea that's completely gone away.
Right, and not just poets and novelists and writers, A.B. Yeshua and Hillel Halkin, but we have the Prime Minister of the State of Israel recently telling French Jews, you know, you don't just think of us as a place to pray to. Think of us as your home.
Right.
And there's a strong endorsement of the idea that Jews are not doing so well outside of Israel, and that they should be in Israel.
Well, I think what I find most interesting about that, the appeal directed toward French Jews, is that it has nothing to do with Judaism. It's come here because it'll be safe here. It's not come here because we're a Jewish state or we honor the Jewish tradition. I mean, one of the great early Zionists, Ahad Ha'am, thought that to move to Israel just to escape anti-Semitism to the Yishuv was a bad idea. You should move because you're drawn there by something.
And now, Shira Dicker shares the story behind her story of the Jerusalem Lover. So, what is the story about?
It is the story primarily of an Israeli academic at Columbia. His name is Elisha Rosenzweig. He has a wife named Rachel. And after 9/11, he begins to turn anti-American, and that begins to morph inch by inch into anti-Zionism that is less political and more up close and personal and rabid. And the novella concerns his wife and what happens to her as this unfolds, a little bit to a lesser extent their daughter, and some of the people connected to his life.
You are the wife of a Columbia University professor.
That's true.
And live right near Columbia University, and you have a daughter whom you raised through your years at Columbia. What are you telling us about the academic life here? What are you telling us about maybe Columbia University specifically?
That's kind of where the narrative or the similarities between our experience and the story ends, but I drew very heavily, and I will say there were two incidents on the Columbia campus that very heavily influenced this story. One of them was a lecture by Daniel Barenboim, the great conductor, allegedly on the topic of conducting Wagner in Israel, and the other was a presentation by Norman Finkelstein at SIPA.
Well, what did they say?
I think that the germ for the story really came after this Barenboim presentation. And this young reporter, Dan Seligson, who's a Columbia student writing for The Spectator, is present in the audience. And the actual...
This is in the novella.
In the novella, right.
Yeah.
The actual notes that he takes are exactly what Barenboim had said, that he called Ariel Sharon, you know, his belly was bloated from the blood of Palestinians. He said outrageously, Jewishly, I mean, stereotypical comments about Jews. What shocked me was the fact that he got applause. He got applause from the president of Columbia, whom we called later that night. Ari and I, we were shaking. I mean, literally, physically, I came home drenched in sweat, not just by what was said by the person, but by the reaction, what I described as the lusty applause.
This idea of Jews as legitimate targets around the world is obviously something we're seeing a lot of these days, with attacks in Paris and Copenhagen and who knows where else. As tying that to the university theme, is that a sentiment you've heard expressed at Columbia University?
So I want to be clear, I've never stood on the campus and felt threatened as a Jew, and in fact
or heard this kind of statement that, you know, Jews around the world are just as legitimate targets as Israelis in Tel Aviv.
I have not heard that on the Columbia campus, but I think we're seeing some of that.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish Channel is available on cable: Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOFLM Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.